You see, there's something that's bothered me for decades, something that still keeps me up at night. We talk about going to Mars like it's inevitable, like it's just a matter of time. SpaceX talks about sending humans there in the 2020s. NASA talks about the 2030s and beyond. Everyone is making plans, building rockets, designing habitats. But here's the thing, when you actually sit down and do the physics, when you calculate the radiation exposure, when you analyze the physiological effects, when you look at the energy requirements, when you consider all the ways things can go wrong, you start to see something disturbing. Mars might not be difficult. Mars might be, with anything close to our current technology, effectively impossible. Now, before you think I've lost my mind, let me be clear. I'm a theoretical physicist. I believe in solving problems. I believe in human ingenuity. But I also believe in being honest about the scale of the challenge. And Mars is in a different category from anything we've ever attempted. Think about the moon. The moon is 240,000 miles away. Apollo got there in 3 days. If something went wrong, they could abort and come home. The trip was short enough that radiation wasn't a huge concern. The communication delay was only a couple of seconds. Mission control could help in near real time. Mars is a completely different story. At its closest approach, Mars is about 34 million miles from Earth, roughly 140 times farther than the moon. And it's only that close every 26 months. The rest of the time, it's much farther. The trip isn't 3 days. It's 6 to 9 months. 6 to 9 months trapped in a tin can. You can't turn around. You can't come home early. Once you launch, you're committed. And then there's communication. At Mars closest, the delay is minutes. When Mars is on the opposite side of the sun, the delay can stretch to tens of minutes one way. So if something goes wrong, mission control can't save you. By the time they understand the problem and send a solution, the situation could already be fatal. The crew is on their own. No cavalry is coming. Now let's talk about radiation, because this is the big one, the killer, the thing that might make Mars travel-literally impossible with current technology. In space, you're exposed to two main sources of radiation. First, solar particle events, bursts of high energy particles from the sun, unpredictable, dangerous. If you're caught in a major solar storm without adequate shielding, you can receive a lethal dose fast. Second, galactic cosmic rays, high energy particles from outside the solar system. They're always present. They're incredibly penetrating. And there's no warning. You're being bombarded constantly. On Earth, we're protected by the atmosphere and the magnetic field. The atmosphere blocks most radiation. The magnetosphere deflects much of the rest. Even on the International Space Station, astronauts still get partial protection from Earth's magnetic field. Radiation exposure is higher than on Earth, but for missions of 6 months to a year, it's manageable. But on the way to Mars, you're outside Earth's magnetosphere. You have no shield except whatever your spacecraft can provide. And here's the problem. Effective radiation shielding is heavy, really heavy. To protect astronauts from cosmic rays in a meaningful way. You need meters of water or equivalent mass in other materials surrounding the crew. That's not a small design change. That's hundreds of tons. And every kilogram of shielding is a kilogram you have to launch, accelerate, control, and eventually slow down. The mass penalty is enormous. A typical Mars mission profile: outbound trip, surface stay, return, adds up to roughly 900 days. Over that period, astronauts could receive around 1,000 millisieverts of radiation exposure. Compare that to typical Earth occupational limits, and you understand what's happening. You're compressing decades of exposure into a couple of years, and it's not just cancer risk. Cosmic rays can damage the brain. High energy particles pass through tissue, causing microscopic damage to neurons. Studies suggest cognitive impairment, memory problems, anxiety-like effects. The terrifying possibility is that astronauts could arrive at Mars not just physically weakened, but mentally degraded. People say we can shield against this. Thick walls, water tanks using fuel as shielding. These ideas help. But none of them eliminate the problem. They reduce the dose, maybe significantly, but not to truly safe levels without making the spacecraft impossibly massive. So, with current technology, we can't truly protect people from deep space radiation on a Mars mission. We can only decide what level of risk we're willing to accept. Now let's talk about microgravity. The way to Mars, astronauts would experience 6 to 9 months of weightlessness. And we already know what microgravity does to the human body. Bones lose density, about 1% to 2% per month. After 6 months, astronauts can lose 10% or more of bone mass. Muscles atrophy. Even with 2 hours a day of exercise, astronauts still lose strength. The heart deconditions. It doesn't have to pump blood against gravity, so it becomes less efficient. Astronauts returning from long missions often struggle to stand without dizziness. Then there are vision problems. In microgravity, fluids shift toward the head, pressure builds, the eyeballs can deform. Some astronauts experience long-term or permanent vision changes. Immune system dysfunction happens too. The immune system doesn't behave normally in space. Dormant viruses can reactivate. Susceptibility to infection can rise. And that's what we see on the ISS in low Earth orbit, where rescue and resupply are possible. Now imagine a Mars mission, 6 to 9 months outbound, then months to more than a year on Mars at only 38% of Earth gravity, then 6 to 9 months home. Mars gravity is better than zero, but it's not enough to fully prevent deterioration. By the time the crew returns to Earth, their bodies could be severely compromised. Bone fragility, muscle loss, cardiovascular weakness. In extreme scenarios, they might not even be able to walk normally under Earth gravity without serious rehabilitation. Yes, artificial gravity could help. A rotating spacecraft that simulates gravity through centrifugal force. But that adds complexity and mass, and we've never built a human-rated rotating spacecraft. It's not a solved technology. It's a major leap. Now let's talk about the psychological side, because people underestimate it. Imagine living in a confined spacecraft with the same few people for months. No privacy, no real escape. Every day, the same walls, the same routines, the same recycled air, and constantly in the back of your mind, one catastrophic failure and you're gone. On Earth, we can study isolation, Antarctic stations, submarines, confinement experiments. We know conflicts happen, depression can set in, performance can degrade. On the ISS, astronauts can look down and see Earth. That matters psychologically. That connection to home is powerful. On the way to Mars, Earth becomes a bright dot, and communication is delayed by minutes to tens of minutes. You can't just pick up a phone and talk to your family. Every conversation becomes a slow exchange, broken by silence. Even the best candidates can break under prolonged stress. And if someone has a serious psychological crisis on the way to Mars, there is no evacuation, no psychiatric hospital. The crew has to manage it themselves. Now let's talk engineering, because even if human bodies and minds were perfectly adapted, Mars would still be brutal. Getting to Mars requires a rocket powerful enough to send a massive payload onto an interplanetary trajectory. Then you have to slow down when you arrive. Mars has an atmosphere, but it's thin. About 1% of Earth's pressure. That's a problem. On Earth, we use the atmosphere for braking with heat shields and parachutes. On the Moon, there's no atmosphere, so we use rockets the whole way down. Mars is in between. The atmosphere is thick enough to cause intense heating, so you need a heat shield, but it's too thin for parachutes alone to slow down a heavy spacecraft enough for a safe landing. So you also need rockets. It's the worst of both worlds. And the spacecraft has to be big, not because people want comfort, but because survival demands it. Life support, food, water, spare parts, medical supplies, tools. Surface habitat, power systems, a vehicle to launch back into orbit for the return trip. All of that mass has to land on Mars. And here's a harsh fact. We don't yet have a proven way to land human. Scale payloads on Mars. The biggest things we've landed are robotic missions on the order of a ton. A crewed mission could require landing 20, 30, 40 tons or more, possibly far more depending on architecture. Some propose multiple smaller landers instead of one big one. That spreads risk, but increases complexity. Now you need multiple precision landings in the same region. If one fails, the mission might be compromised. Others propose positioning cargo, send supplies first, then send the crew later. That can reduce risk, but it increases the number of launches and the number of failure opportunities. Now, propulsion. Chemical rockets are what we have. They work, but they're inefficient for interplanetary travel. The rocket equation is unforgiving. The more mass you want to move, the exponentially more fuel you need. For a Mars mission, a fully fueled spacecraft could weigh hundreds of tons. Most of that is propellant. You burn huge amounts just to reach orbit. Then you need fuel to shape your trajectory, fuel to slow down, fuel to land, fuel to launch off Mars, fuel to come home. Every kilogram matters. Every efficiency improvement counts. But chemical energy has limits. Nuclear thermal propulsion could help. It can be significantly more efficient than chemical rockets, potentially cutting transit time and reducing fuel mass. The basic technology has been explored before. But it comes with political, safety, and development challenges. Launching nuclear systems scares the public, and not without reason. Electric propulsion, ion drives are efficient but low thrust, great for cargo, not ideal for fast human transfers. If the trip takes longer, radiation and microgravity damage worsen, and exotic propulsion, fusion, antimatter, nuclear pulse is not near term. Those are future dreams, not operational tools. Now life support. On the ISS, we recycle water and generate oxygen. But the ISS is resupplied. If something breaks, we can send up parts. If there's a crisis, the crew can return to Earth quickly. On Mars, none of that applies. Everything has to work for years, or you must carry spares and redundancy for critical systems. But redundancy adds mass, and mass is the enemy. And even with redundancy, failures can cascade. Parts wear out. Electronics fail. Filters clog. Seals degrade. Unexpected interactions happen. Space is harsh on machines. The crew has to be able to fix almost anything. Engineers, mechanics, electricians, medics, all at once. Because there's no repair shop. There's no emergency rescue. There's no quick resupply. Now consider timing and mission profile. Mars is reachable only during launch windows about every 26 months. Use of fuel, efficient trajectory, and travel time is about 9 months. Faster trajectories exist, but demand more energy. And once you arrive, you typically can't just come home whenever you feel like it. You often must wait on the surface for the planets to align again. Around 18 months before you can return efficiently. That's why the standard mission architecture often looks like this 6 to 9 months outbound, around 18 months on the surface, 6 to 9 months back, roughly 900 days. 2.5 years of radiation exposure, physiological deterioration, isolation, and risk. Now let's talk about Mars itself. People imagine you land and you've arrived like stepping onto a desert. Mars is not a desert. Mars is hostile. The atmosphere is about 95% carbon dioxide. You can't breathe it. The pressure is extremely low, almost a vacuum. If your suit fails, you're in lethal trouble. Temperature averages around minus 60 Celsius, with brutal swings between day and night. And the dust is everywhere. Fine, electrostatically charged, clinging to equipment. And it's toxic, containing perchlorates that are harmful to humans. Mars has planet-wide dust storms that can last for months. If you rely on solar panels, a long storm can cripple your energy supply. So you likely need nuclear power or massive storage. That adds complexity. And radiation on the surface is still high. Mars has no global magnetic field. The thin atmosphere offers limited shielding. Long-term habitation requires heavy shielding. Buried habitats, thick walls, lava tubes, caves, anything to put mass between you and the sky. Water exists as ice, but extracting it requires energy, machinery, and reliability. Oxygen can be produced from kale, but again, you need power and robust equipment. Food is a huge issue. Martian soil is toxic and the environment is wrong. You need controlled greenhouses, careful systems, and even then it's not a solved problem at settlement scale. So survival on Mars isn't one problem. It's dozens of problems that must all be solved at the same time, and any single one can end the mission. Now return to the hardest truth. There is no real abort option. On the moon, Apollo crews could return in days. Apollo 13 had an explosion, and they made it home, barely. On Mars, if something goes wrong during transit, orbital mechanics makes turnaround much more difficult than people assume. If something goes wrong on the surface and the return vehicle fails, the crew can be stranded with no rescue. Some people say astronauts will accept the risk. They're volunteers. They know what they're doing. Yes. But there's a difference between risk and a mission where death becomes likely. There's a threshold where bravery stops being heroic and becomes reckless. Now, after hearing all that, the natural question is, what are we doing about it? The proposed solutions fall into two categories: incremental improvements and revolutionary breakthroughs. Incremental improvements, better rockets, better life support, better shielding, help, but they don't close the gap. Revolutionary solutions, nuclear propulsion, artificial gravity, industrial, scale in, situ production, could close the gap, but they aren't ready. Start with radiation. Water shielding sounds smart. Surround the crew with water tanks. Use the water as you go. But to provide meaningful cosmic ray protection, you need meters of water. That's enormous mass. Using fuel as shielding works early, but it decreases as you burn propellant. Magnetic shielding might help with charged particles from solar storms, but cosmic rays are so energetic that practical field strength struggle and power requirements explode. Medical countermeasures are a research area, but we're nowhere near a reliable solution that can offset deep space radiation exposure. So the honest conclusion is we can reduce radiation dose, but we can't truly solve it yet. Mars crews would still accept increased cancer risk and potential neurological harm. Artificial gravity could solve microgravity deterioration. Rotation can simulate gravity. But building a large rotating spacecraft is a huge engineering challenge. Tethering vehicles and spinning them is possible, but complex. Dynamic stability, docking, failure modes. None of this is routine. It's unproven at human mission scale. Propulsion improvements could reduce transit time. Nuclear thermal propulsion could help significantly, but politics and safety concerns slow progress. Electric propulsion is efficient but low thrust, better for cargo than for crew. Exotic drives remain far off. In situ resource utilization is promising. Making fuel and oxygen on Mars could reduce what you must bring from Earth. If you can turn coal and water into methane and oxygen reliably, you change the mission economics and mass constraints. But it requires industrial equipment on another planet functioning for months or years with minimal maintenance. And the system must work before the crew arrives. If it fails, the crew has no return fuel. That's not a setback. That's a death sentence. Entry, descent, and landing is still one of the hardest challenges. We can land small payloads. Human missions require landing massive payloads precisely and safely. Concepts exist: large aeroshells, inflatable decelerators, propulsive landing, but proven human scale systems don't yet exist. Life support must be ultra reliable for 900 days with no resupply. That means redundancy, spares, repair capability, and crew versatility. But every spare adds mass. Every kilogram hurts you. Now we arrive at the deeper question, even if we can do it, should we? Supporters argue Mars is insurance for humanity, making us multi-planetary. But Mars is not a great backup. Even a damaged Earth is still more habitable than Mars. And a Mars settlement would depend on Earth for decades, perhaps centuries. If Earth can't send supplies, the settlement may fail. Others argue inspiration. Mars will inspire a generation. That's true. But inspiration comes with enormous cost, and we must ask whether that's the best way to spend resources. Others argue science. Mars can answer questions about life and planetary evolution. But robots can do much of this science without risking human life. And there's the exploration argument we go because we are explorers. That's real. But Mars exploration isn't like walking into a new valley. It's living inside fragile machines in an environment that wants you dead. There are alternatives, the moon as a training ground. Lunar bases are closer rescuable and allow us to test systems. Space habitats, rotating structures where we create the environment we want. These might be more practical, long-term than trying to survive on a hostile planet. And the most important alternative is Earth itself. If we can't build a sustainable civilization on Earth, the most habitable planet we'll ever have, what makes us think we can build one on Mars? So where does that leave us? My answer is this: yes, we should go to Mars eventually, but not yet. Not until we've solved more of the problems. Not until we've reduced radiation risk. Not until we've proven landing systems for human scale payloads. Not until we have life support that can survive years without resupply. Not until we've tested systems extensively, likely on the moon first. Because rushing to Mars before we're ready could lead to disaster. And a disaster on Mars, astronauts dying far from home, could set back space exploration for decades by destroying public trust and political will. I respect the ambition of people who want to go fast, but I'd rather go right. And here's the key point I want people to understand. The fact that something is currently impossible doesn't mean it's permanently impossible. Human history is full of impossible things that became possible through persistence, ingenuity, and time. But we don't get to skip the hard parts. We don't get to ignore physics. We don't get to wish away radiation or biology or engineering realities. Mars is our current impossible. Not because humans lack courage, but because the environment is unforgiving and our technology is still immature. We'll chip away at it. We'll improve propulsion. We'll study radiation biology. We'll build better shielding concepts. We'll test partial gravity. We'll develop robust life support. We'll learn how to land big payloads. We'll build surface power systems. We'll master in situ production. Problem by problem, decade by decade, we'll push the boundary. And one day, maybe not in my lifetime, but one day, humans will set foot on Martian soil, look up at that strange sky, and see Earth as a small blue star. and it will be one of the greatest achievements in our history. Not because we conquered Mars, but because we refuse to accept that impossible is forever, because that is what humans do. We take the impossible and we turn it into a frontier.